Hey everybody, this is Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. We are starting our series on religious trauma and spiritual trauma. So the overarching understanding of this is the trauma that is inflicted on people as a result of legalistic, dogmatic, harsh, and not well thought out rules put on people by religious institutions. First of all, I want to talk about religious trauma syndrome. Religious trauma syndrome is this syndrome that is not in the DSM-5. It is not diagnosable for treatment, but it is absolutely something that exists. The definition of religious trauma syndrome is the psychological damage that is inflicted on someone by a religious institution. Not always on purpose, but I don't know that that matters. The other side of that definition is the grief, the loss, the confusion, and the fear that people go through when they have been part of a religious institution for a long time and then they leave for whatever reason. That part of it is something that we will get to talk about, but I'm a little too close to it right now to speak about it in any kind of way that's productive for you. So we're going to talk about the first part. One day I'll tell my story. I promise you I will tell my story. I can't right now. No, okay, get me to 100 subscribers. 100. And I'll tell it. I might not use names. If you were to break down the trauma that is inflicted on people from religious institutions, specifically Christian churches, you can break most of it down into 3 sections. You have modesty, you have purity, and you have obedience. So we start with modesty because that is one of the things that is the most overt statements of you can't wear that, you are not modest enough in that. So we're going to start with that. The definition of modesty in general from most of these churches is what you wear and how you act in order to not incite attraction or arousal in any way from members of the opposite sex. And I am using those phrases specifically because the assumption in a lot of these places is marriage is a man and a woman, relationships are a man and a woman, one man, one woman, period. So that's the perspective we're doing this from. The problem with the modesty rules and the way that most churches approach modesty, it puts the responsibility mostly on the female in the situation. Women have to dress modestly. They have to cover up high necklines or higher necklines, longer shorts or skirt lines, covered midriff with a bathing suit. Don't be too friendly, but be friendly enough because, well, you're a woman and that's what you're for. And make people feel comfortable, but not so much they think you might be attracted to them, because any attraction that you have ever has to be like tamped down because that's not appropriate in a modest situation. The idea of modesty is very much tied with the idea of purity. And so we're going to go back and forth between a lot of them. But purity, the definition of it would be keeping yourself away from any sexual misconduct that could defile your marital bed. Yes, I said defile. I use that word because that's the word that so many people use. The idea of modesty is if you are immodest, then it incites arousal from people. And when they are aroused, then they do things that are impure. If you're not part of a church, you might be surprised by this statement, but that line of thinking is one of the most prevalent, especially in youth ministries. It is the female's responsibility to keep everything pure and everything modest because the assumption is this: men see women and they go into a frenzy. The more of your skin they see, the more frenzied they're going to be. So if you don't dress modestly, you're going to get them worked up. If they get worked up, then you are going to eventually end up doing something impure. Let's break that down a little bit into the assumptions we are making in that very large statement. First of all, the assumption is that men can't control themselves. Secondly, the assumption is that women are responsible for both themselves and for the men. When we talk about this, we are talking about centuries of an understanding that the man is in charge, but the woman is in charge of his needs. Going a little bit further, if a woman's job is to stay chaste and pure until marriage, and that is the gift that she can give her husband, that is the verbiage that's used, by the way. The best gift you can give your future husband is your purity. That has nothing to do with my brain. That has nothing to do with my heart. That has nothing to do with the things that I might be good at or the ways that I might involve myself in our family. That also has nothing to do with my sexual orientation. All of that combine means that whatever as a female you are walking into that marriage with, the most important part is what is between your legs. That's it. That's the most important. Do you see how gross that is? Can you understand how damaging that can be? You put out there these ideas that women are supposed to dress modestly in order to not tempt the boys, and then the boys will ravage them because they're just wild pack animals that'll paw at whatever they want to. How dare anyone compromise the worth of a person to make them either a pack animal with no responsibility and no self-control, or just a vessel that the only thing you bring in is what you have on you. Physically, by the way, not emotionally, not spiritually. It's all about that. Hear me when I say this. Rape culture comes from the church. The understanding that men can take what they want because they deserve it, and women are responsible for making sure men know they can't have it. That understanding comes from the church. That is how we treat men and women in the church. That is how we approach things in the assumptions that we make, in the ways that we talk to people. As some of you know, I belong to a Facebook group for people in my former profession. At some point, this group is absolutely going to ban me, but until they do, this is where we are. Recently, someone posted in the Facebook group a series of slides that were posted by their volunteer. In those slides were the different things that the church pushes on people and the resulting trauma they could have from it. He said, "What does everyone think of this?" One of the women on that board commented and said, "I think these look like an excuse to sin. The church has not hurt you in these ways, but you think that they have, and it's because you don't want to do what the church wants you to do, so you're calling it trauma and excusing your sin." Bold statement. Read further. What's her example? Her example is, of course I'm supposed to dress modestly. Not wanting to does not mean I'm not supposed to. And if I don't want to, it's sinful. Why? Why is that sinful? It's not because the Bible says. It's not because God decreed it. It's because humans decided that what women have is scary. The last section that we have under those three toppings besides purity and modesty is obedience. And the obedience portion of this is what just floors me, because that's where gaslighting comes from. If you don't like the modesty and if you don't like the purity, you have obedience. Whereas if you don't like it, you do it anyway because it's what we're telling you to do. If you are obedient to the Lord, He will give you what you need. Friends, there are people out there who are spending a lot of their time trying to be good enough for God. Because somehow, somewhere, we got it so tangled up in the understanding that if you're good enough for God, and the fact that you don't feel good enough for other people doesn't matter. Because if you believe in God and if you trust God and you follow Him, He'll give you the desires of your heart, right? That mindset is not distinctly unbiblical, but it is distinctly unhelpful because it then gets applied to so many different things. If you're not going to a Bible study, you're a bad Christian. And if you're a bad Christian, then you don't believe in God. And then God's not going to give you things that you want. How many of you out there have been processing things in life as though you aren't getting what you want because you're not a good enough Christian, because you're not a good enough follower of Jesus? Because if you were, you would have what you need. Isn't that exhausting? That sounds exhausting. Wrapping up this video gives you no answers, and I get that. This is just the beginning, friends. Just the beginning of how we are going to unload this trauma and put it where it belongs, which is not on you. That's it for today. At the risk of sounding like an ambulance-chasing lawyer, if you, after these definitions, feel like you have had some religious trauma in your life, I would love you to send me your story, send me a question that you want me to answer. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all of those things. Like I said, if you get me up to 100 subscribers, I'll start sharing my story. Until next week, have a good one and take care.